From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everybody. My name is Louise. I am National Security Correspondent for NPR. I write spy thrillers and cover the spy beat, and I am delighted to be here as part of the National Book Festival. And I have been especially looking forward to the chance to talk to you. Please welcome Anne-Marie Slaughter.
Thank you.
So I will introduce Anne-Marie as President and CEO of the New America Foundation, which is a think tank based here in Washington. However, I suspect that most people in this room know you, at least initially, because of a little article that you wrote, which electrified the country, I think it's safe to say, 4 years ago. The article was headlined, "Why Women Still Can't Have It All." It was the cover of the Atlantic magazine in the summer of 2012. It overnight became the most read article in the history of that magazine, and you have since expanded on it and turned it into a book, which is what we are here to talk about, called Unfinished Business. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And welcome. So I actually want to start with that headline because, as I say, I've been looking forward to this conversation, and yesterday I tweeted, "Why women still can't have it all," looking forward to putting that question to Anne-Marie Slaughter at the book festival. And you tweeted back and said, "We've actually moved past that question." And I thought, we have? How did I miss that? So let me throw that question to you first. Have you figured it all out? You've cracked this and we can have it all and you're here to tell us how?
So I'm delighted to be at the National Book Festival. What is better than a day entirely devoted to books? It's the best. And I love the fact that our conversation started on Twitter and now continues today. And so what I meant was, one of the things I've learned since writing that article is that we really want to move past the frame of having it all. And actually, Rebecca Traister originally wrote a post after my article came out and taught me things I didn't know, which is that having it all came from Helen Gurley Brown, the editor of Cosmo. I think she had a different idea of what having it all means. But more broadly, it makes women sound selfish, right? We're living in a country where millions of people are trying to have enough to simply get by. And to pose it as, can I have it all, even though you can say that's part of the American DNA, I think starts the whole conversation off in the wrong place. So I no longer use the phrase. I talk about equality between men and women, or gender equality. And I talk about how can all of us, and that means men as well as women, and I am so thrilled to see so many men in this audience, how can men and women live in a way that they can work and care for their loved ones at the same time? You notice I also didn't use balance. How can we fit those two things together? That's the question.
Okay, and I want to hear some of your specific thoughts on that, but before we get ahead of ourselves, let me let you just tell your story of how you came to write that article and then the book. I wonder if you could take us back to that moment where you had finally gotten the dream job, you're at this high-power position at the State Department, and realized it wasn't working.
Yeah.
It wasn't working. Well, you weren't able to do the job you needed to do at home with your family. What happened? Tell us where you were and what was going on in your life.
So the first thing to say is yes, this was absolutely a dream job. To be the first woman director of policy planning, it's the big think job in the State Department. Secretary Clinton wanted to put a woman in that job to show that we could do the big thinking too. And I was there in her early morning meeting every morning at 8:45. That's very heady. And I loved it. I left my family in Princeton. There was no way to move my husband and sons to Washington. I mean, they were at that point in middle school and elementary school. My husband teaches in Princeton. We would have uprooted them. My husband would have had to commute. That was never an option. In fact, my sons didn't want me to leave, but once I said, well, how about moving to Washington? It was, bye, Mom. It's like, no, they were not moving. So
you're doing the train
So
commute
I
to
would
DC
leave, I would literally leave the house at 5 a.m. every morning, feeling like kind of a thief in the night. All three boys are sleeping, my husband and my sons. and I would come down here, make it in time for the early meeting, and go back late on Friday. So it meant I had 2 days a week. And I mean, look, many people don't see their families enough, but it was hard. But it was doable. My husband stepped up and was the lead parent. And then as I wrote, my elder son was, I think, a not unusual teenager. I mean, it's not that he...
Which is to say, what, a complete nightmare at this
more or less. Yeah.
Having a new teenager in our house.
Yes, I mean, he turned into, kind of, you'd come downstairs and say good morning, and he'd take your head off, and you'd say, excuse me for living. And he would, but he was making bad choices. And indeed, I didn't expect that. He was with the wrong crowd. Many parents know this. He was tuning out at school. He started getting into trouble with the local police. Little stuff, but enough that, I'd get a call, and Andy would say, he's been suspended, and I'd be suspended. I was not prepared for it. And it got to the point that I was literally asking, what am I doing here? Why am I here when my son so clearly needs me and his father? It wasn't like I was going to go save the day. It was we needed both hands on deck. And that really just started to change the way I'd always thought about this. I had always said to younger women, of course you can do it. You just have to want it enough. And I believed that. And I knew I had lots of advantages, a flexible job and money, and I knew that, but I still really thought, you can do it. And when this happened, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, all these other women who had a divorce or a child with special needs or had to move or don't have the advantages I do, it's not that they want to drop out. They're simply choosing the people they love over the work they may equally love. But that's something we should admire and celebrate, not accuse them of having failed some idea that they're supposed to be able to do it all. And the other thing was, there's a huge number of things we could do in our society to make it a lot easier for women as well as men. So that's why I wrote the article.
So let me walk you through some of the strategies, because I think we're all sitting here thinking, okay, so how do we, if not have it all, if that's not the way we should be framing the goal, how do we try to have the work we love and take care of the family we love at the same time? One of the things that intrigued me that you propose is interval training.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
So in the book,
because I'm visioning a treadmill, and it's not.
So one of the core reasons this is so hard is that we still have a 1950s idea of what a career looks like. You come out of school, you plunge into your career, you start climbing this ladder in your 30s and 40s, or in my case, 40s and 50s, when you are having children, typically when most of us are having children, that's right at the heart of the hard part of the ladder, and you're soaring up and you reach your peak sometime in your 50s or your early 60s, you retire at 65 and you die at 75. That isn't our lives. That's just not our lives. Girls today have a life expectancy of 86, which means a large number of people are expected to live to 100. And you can read plenty of things on the cover of Time magazine that says we're going to live to 120, and I don't know what we're going to do then. But there's plenty of time. If Hillary Clinton wins, she'll be 70 when she becomes president, and she didn't start her political career until after Chelsea went to college. She was a lawyer and she did lots of things, but she ran for Senate, she ran for president, she became Secretary of State, she ran for president again, all after her daughter went to college. So interval training is the idea that all of us would think about our careers as periods where we go hard, come out of school, you're young. When I was young, I pulled plenty of all-nighters. I could travel, I could do all that. I didn't have a house or a husband, or, I was free. You go hard, and then you slow down. This is how athletes get into peak performance training, right? You think about on a Stairmaster. You go hard, and you slow down. And that women and men should be able to think of their careers in terms of multiple intervals so that they're going to work longer, but they're also going to have time for the people they love, because your kids are only young once, and your parents are only aging and needing you once, or a spouse who is ill, or anybody else in your family. And really, there's no reason there isn't time for both. except for we have this very artificial idea of how you have to work.
So where are you in your interval training right now? Because I have to pause and note you decided to leave the high-power job at the State Department and kind of downshift, let's call it, leaning out, whatever you want to call it. And I have to note that your version of leaning out involves being a tenured Princeton professor, writing a best-selling New York Times bestseller book, founding a think tank here in Washington, and you've got another book coming out in the spring. So if that is leaning out, count me in. Where are you now? How's your family doing now?
All right, one of the great ironies, of course, is I write this article about wanting to be home with my children. It exploded, and suddenly I had more invitations than I knew what to do with, and I was spending less time with my children. And every now and again, one of my sons will grumble, I'm going to write an Atlantic article, and I'm going to tell you what it was really like, that mom was never home. So I am very high energy, no question, and yes. But here's the difference. I still work a lot. I love my work, but there's a huge difference between what I'm doing and taking that really big job. One more step up in the State Department, I would have been an undersecretary or a deputy secretary. One more step up as a professor, or I'd been a dean, I'd be a president of a university. Those jobs, your time is not your own. You cannot say, it's my son's birthday, it's a period of vacation, whatever it is. What I'm doing, I'm running an organization, but it's 200 people, and I'm the boss, so I can be here 2 days a week, but then be home at other times. I can adjust. When I needed to take my son to look at colleges, we could do that. So I do hope that there is another really big job in my future, but it will be after both sons have left the house. And so what I've done is to choose the kinds of work I want to do to create a lot of flexibility.
So, talk to us about a phrase you just used, the phrase lead parent.
Yes.
You and I have talked about that before, and when I mention that, I'm always interested to see it's men who seem to really relate to that, yes. Because it seems to invite a bigger, more creative vision of how a family can work and yes. Speak to this idea of interval training. One of you is lead parenting while the other one goes out and does something, and
that's right.
Then you flip it. Is that the way it's worked for you?
I was going to say yes, and I'm thinking my husband would say, yeah, my turn's next. So I thought really hard about lead parent and talked about it with my husband, and you're absolutely right. It is chosen in part because stay-at-home dad is not a status that most men aspire to. It is, and I don't like stay-at-home mom either. It implies, you're a professional, you're in the office, and if you're not, if you're parenting, you're staying at home. Lead parenting is what my husband's been doing. That means parenting is hard. It involves all sorts of things. He's taking the lead. He's the one who's there. He's the one who may call for all sorts of things. I'm still actively a parent, but when somebody's got to be there, it's my husband. And yes, I imagine that men and women can be lead parents and trade off, and the men who are lead parents, the reward is they get that special relationship with their kids that women have traditionally had, and most of us don't want to give up, and they can work too. So it is a very deliberate construction of parenting or caregiving. You could say I'm the lead caregiver for my own parent in a way that makes it equally important and not this residual, I'm just the person at home.
I mean, it sounds like some of the point you're making is it matters what we call things.
Yes,
it does. A lead parent who happens to be male is the same thing as a stay-at-home dad, but
it matters.
It matters. What words we use when we talk about it?
I lived through changing Mrs. and Miss to Ms. And when that first was proposed, it was like, oh, you got to be kidding. MS, Ms., although I was from the South, so Ms. was pretty common. But that made a huge difference because before, the thing you knew about a female was she married or not? And that was sending the signal that was the most important thing to know about her, was she Miss or Mrs. So it does matter how we talk about things. We talk about same-sex marriage. We reframe these issues.
Okay, so here's my confession. Your publisher was kind enough to courier your book to me at my hotel room where I was in New York on a work trip so that I could read it before I interviewed you. And I was trying to read it on the train on the way home, and the soccer carpool of one of my kids fell apart, and I'm fielding these frantic phone calls from a stranded child on the soccer field in the quiet car. So we sort that out.
We've all
Then I
been
get
there.
back here, I'm trying to read it in between doing interviews for my day job, and my other son fractured his ankle, and we end up in an emergency pediatrician visit, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I end up frantically reading the last chapters in the taxi on the way to interview you. Which prompts me to wonder, are the people who would benefit from reading your book and some of the ideas in it too frazzled to find the time to read it?
Well, I have heard from a number of people that their mother gave them the book. In other words, the person had the time to read, and my mother often now reads things I don't have time to read and lets me know about them. So I do think, yes, the people who are in the midst of this, either mothers or fathers, maybe you can read it chapter by chapter. And I did have people, even with my Atlantic article, telling me, it's 13,000 words. You can't be a working mother because you know we don't have time to read that. What I would just say is I read last thing at night, always. And I actually start every day, and I will wake up earlier to do this. I read for 20 minutes with my cup of coffee, because that's
Just pleasure or
pleasure.
catching up on
pleasure.
the
No,
Really?
only
Okay.
pleasure. It can be fiction or nonfiction. I generally read fiction at night and nonfiction in the morning, because my brain is fresher in the morning. But it's just this little island of that cup of coffee and my book. A lot of people meditate. I think about books when I meditate. So it's just, and so I think you can make time to read. But I agree, we've all been to where you describe it.
So you mentioned your boss at State Department was Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
A few of her emails have been making their way into the public domain lately, and your name comes up in some of them. And I want to ask you about one in particular that caught my eye. This was an email that you wrote around Christmas time 2009.
Yep.
And you wrote to Hillary Clinton begging her to take a day off. What prompted that?
I just have to say before I answer this question, when that email came out and people started calling me about it, I thought, I can't believe this. I wrote her hundreds of emails about things like Middle East peace and Syria and China, and all anybody wants to know about is my asking her to take time off. So even there, it was kind of a reframing of what I've been known for. So that was, what I actually said was, there I was, we're all working. My husband kind of believes in Santa Claus, which is to say that Christmas magically appears every year. I mean, he's wonderful, but stockings, and he cooks, but somebody else organizes the meal. So what I was doing, I wrote her and said, would you leave on the 22nd? Because if you leave on the 22nd, we can all leave. And then a lot of people are going to need to be home. I needed to be home to make Christmas happen. And so I wrote her that, and she did. And I knew, because that's the kind of person she is, that if I framed it that way, if I said, take a day off because you've been working too hard, no. If I said, leave 2 days early so everybody else can have the holiday, she would respond. And she did.
And she did.
And she did. She left, and absolutely anybody in Washington knows if the principal's there, nobody else leaves, right? You have to, and so she did, and then all the rest of us felt like we could take the day, vacation days to go home early, and she did.
Did you watch her struggle with the work-life balance?
No, because again, I mean, she's at that stage of life where her family is her foundation and support rather than her. Needing to attend to them. So she did go home almost every weekend to be with Bill Clinton. And she would come back refreshed on Sundays. You rarely saw her on the Sunday shows, only occasionally. She really would go home. And it was clear, I always tell this story that before Chelsea got married, we were in Beijing, and she was being interviewed as U.S. Secretary of State by some Chinese TV interviewer. And right at the end of the interview, he said to her, well, what about Chelsea's wedding? And she said, with just right off the top of her head, she said, oh, well, that's my real life. And I thought, yes, That's the way I feel too. That's my real life. And so, her family, Chelsea and her husband, were hugely important, but they were supports, not drains.
But I want to stay with this idea of, you're in this high-power job at the State Department, and you're thinking about, oh my gosh, who's going to put the Christmas lights on the Christmas tree? Because for so many of us who've struggled trying to figure out, I guess my point is, you do acknowledge you're writing from a privileged position, and that for a lot of people the struggle isn't can you have it all, it's like can you have enough to get dinner on the table and pay the electric bill to keep the lights on. But that someone with your resources and at your position, you're still struggling with the fact that there are only 24 hours in the day.
Yes, so a couple things. Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I'm really easy on myself in the sense that we just knew we were going to drop balls. We told our sons early on, like, we are not going to remember to get this form in. We are not going to be the class parents. We're just not. And I figured that parenting them the way best we could with a lot of love and was going to be more important than a lot of activities I might otherwise have done. And the other thing, and I write about this at length in this book, as the woman, you do have to let go, right? My husband was willing to be lead parent, but at some point he said to me, I'm doing this, but I'm doing this my way. You are not micromanaging how I parent. If you want to do that, you come home, right? And he does things very differently than I do. I always say, I'd come home and want them to clean their rooms and all this, and he would spend the weekend showing them all the Marx Brothers movies, right? And I came to realize, you do have to assume that a man is as capable at home and as a parent as you are in the office. He is going to do it differently often. And, everybody's personalities differ. Sometimes the man is the neatnik and the woman isn't. It's not, there are many differences. But in the office, even though I do something differently than a man, I assume I know what I'm doing. And I had to come to accept that although I thought I knew better, because my mother raised me and her mother raised her and her mother raised her, who was to say I knew better? And he certainly thinks he knows what he's doing, and I had to let go. And so that, and balls got dropped. Things that I thought needed to be done were not done. But things that he thought were important did get done. And as I look at our sons now, I think probably knowing the Marx Brothers movies is more important than whatever it was.
Than whether their beds were made.
Yeah, exactly. Their beds aren't made, I can promise you that.
As you've talked to people about this and been on book tour, do you find that men are as interested in this conversation as women are? It will not escape anyone's notice that we're two women up here talking about it. I do notice, like you did, the number of men in the audience, which is great, but is it a different conversation when you find yourself fielding questions from men?
So I've never been in an audience only of men. That would be great, actually. I have been in a growing number of audiences that are almost 50-50, and they are student audiences. Because young people, like in business school or law school or university, couples come, and they're assuming that they're going to both have to do this. And, I write about questions and conversations you need to have with each other to make sure that's going to be a real thing and not just a paper thing, because most of my friends thought it was going to be equal to, and then when the guy got a promotion, it never occurred to him he wouldn't take it, and then she couldn't take her promotion because they couldn't both do it.
Like what? What are some of the questions we should be asking?
That's the key one, is if, we support each other's career, will you move for me, right? If I get a fabulous job somewhere else, will you move? Will you leave your job so I can take this great opportunity? Or will you defer your promotion so I can take mine? That is not generally part of what most men expect. But to your original question, I think this generation of men want a number of things. I think they want a closer relationship with their kids than many of them had with their fathers. Just like I wanted to work in a way my mother didn't, many men think, why shouldn't I have that bond with my children? And why shouldn't I have that side of my life too? And lots of men I know think it's crazy that women get maternity leave and they get a week, right? That's not fair, right? But that means a mother will bond more closely with the child, not because she's a woman, but because she's the one who's feeding and diapering the child. And so if a man does that, and we have all the same-sex couples and single fathers, of course men can do that. So I think of my generation, and certainly my father's generation, no, this is a female conversation. But I think for the younger generation, it's both. But again, we have to assume when men talk about what they're doing with their children, it's probably a different conversation in many ways, and that's normal.
Let me ask you about some of the nitty-gritty details as we talk about this stuff. I noticed you were tweeting this week about a House bill that would require baby changing stations in men's and women's rooms in federal buildings. And putting aside the question of whether we will even have separate men's and women's rooms
Yes, exactly.
5 years from now. I noticed here we don't, unisex. But this should be as much a men's challenge problem as women's. And I wondered when I read that, whether you've been on this path. It's great to think the big strategic policy thoughts, but you also got to get the details right to make any of this work for us.
Yes, and somebody tweeted that at me, and I thought, yes, that's a classic example of reinforcing stereotypes, right? Because we are assuming that men don't change diapers. That's assuming that women do. That's assuming that women are the caregivers and men are the breadwinners, and that's exactly what we have to undo. So something as small as that, and like the way we talk, is very important. But also, if you are a single father, where are you supposed to change your child? Or not a single father, you're just a father who is with their children. What are you supposed to do? I mean, you ought to be able to have a surface to change your baby just as much as a mother does. So those little things do matter, and they change our assumptions.
I want to open it up to questions in a moment, but let me throw one more at you, which is I have to ask, we've been talking about Hillary Clinton. Your name keeps appearing on lists of possible cabinet secretaries should there be a President Clinton.
Unprompted by me, I should add. But
unsolicited. But, I mean, where are you in your personal journey, if I can call it that? If the right phone call were to come, are you at a point where you would lean back into a big Washington job where you don't have control over, it's my kid's birthday and I need to go?
So, ideally, not quite yet. I mean, I'm very committed to New America. I still have a son at home, although not for that much longer. I say that when we are applying to college, so I'm going to assume not for that much longer. There are things that if the president asks you to do, and probably for me particularly if she's the first woman president, you say yes. But I can say I'm very committed. I promised the board of New America that I would be there for 5 years, and I'm very committed to building it. I certainly would hope to be there by the end of her administration, but not necessarily at the beginning.
All right. Let me open it up to your questions. I think we have microphones here, and forgive me if you can line up at the mics, and we'll just go back and forth. If you care to identify yourself, that would be great. Ask a question, and if you can keep it short so we can get to as many of you as possible, that would be great. Let me start with this lady right here. Please, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I couldn't tell where you're pointing. I'm Sister Marge Clark, and I work with Network, which is a National Catholic Social Justice Lobby. I'm very excited. I was excited looking at the title of your book. One of the things I work on is legislation to improve women's places in the workplace. And there are some really good bills out right now. And I was interested in hearing what you said about the changing table in men's rooms and things. I wonder, are you putting your name and your power behind some of these other bills that are out there in terms of things like pregnancy adaptations, the things like paid leave and sick leave, all really affect women more than men, but they affect both.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, are you able to put your power behind that?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked, because again, so the message of the book is kind of twofold, that the unfinished business of the women's movement is to value care as much as we value competition. So traditional women's work as much as traditional men's work, and then to expect men and women to do it equally. So valuing care there's an entire legislative agenda, and we are seeing it in this election year, and it's important that we are, and we're seeing it from Republicans and Democrats. I think of it as the care agenda, not the women's agenda, again, because I want to undo these stereotypes. But it's the big three. It's paid family leave. This is one place where we can leapfrog the rest of the world and get beyond maternity leave, paternity leave, leave to take care of elders. Just call it family leave and make it available to everyone, regardless of whom they're caring for. So paid family leave is essential, and New America is working hard on paid family leave. Then affordable, quality childcare. I'd say childcare and elder care, but let's start with childcare because the cost of childcare for 2 children is more expensive than the cost of rent in all 50 states. And that's driving people out of the workforce. So childcare is essential, and again, you're seeing Secretary Clinton has an important proposal there. And then finally, real flexible work, right? Not just a day here or there, but the ability to work remotely or to come in late or to leave early, a whole set of policies that other countries, at least our peer countries, have, and we can also encourage.
And that's something you think should be federally mandated?
So there are things like you can mandate not discriminating against people on the basis of part-time work or flexible work. That one is harder to legislate. But there are ways that you can encourage it and provide incentives. And the first two, on paid family leave, I think business is going to want federal standards because right now we have 4 states, including New York and California, so 2 huge states that have paid family leave, and a bunch of cities. That means you're going to have a patchwork, right? It's going to be very unpredictable which city or state you're in, and gradually then business would prefer one uniform standard. So that one definitely. Childcare, President Nixon vetoed a bill that had been passed by both houses of Congress for universal childcare in 1971. It'd be great to get back there, but I'd settle for lots of incentives and other things that encourage both on-site childcare and community care.
Okay, thank you. Question right here.
Thank you. My question is going to be about transition in interval training. And my context is I'm a military family member. So my husband's active duty, he deployed, I ramp it up. I am also in the military as a reservist and I have a civilian career. My turn to deploy is coming. Yeah. So how, when you're not changing jobs, but you are going to have different abilities and how much time you can devote to that and not everything else. Yeah. Can you tell us what have your best practices been as you've gone through some of those intervals? Yeah. How did you transition?
Absolutely. So thank you. And first of all, I should just say, when I did feel like I wasn't ever seeing my family and this was hard, I would think to myself, our military deploy for a year at a time, and I'm seeing my children every 6th day. They're not seeing their family for a year. So I want to start by thanking you for your service and your husband's service. To your question, this is really important. I mean, what we really do need to do is change employer attitudes so that when they see, a part-time job, even no job for a while, they don't think, oh, I'm not going to hire this person. I'm going to hire the person that has that sterling 1950s resume where it just goes straight up. That's the most important thing we can do. But beyond that, you do need, I say in the book, don't drop out, defer, right? So defer the big job, but keep your skills in, keep your contacts ready. Think about things that, let's say you need to learn fundraising, or you need to learn public speaking, or having something written with your name on it would help your career down the line. Use that time to do those things, and that's also a better story. So you can say, yes, it was my turn to be lead parent. During that time, I wrote this, or I took on a new set of experiences through volunteering. That, I say, think about your career as a portfolio of skills and experiences and figure out where you can add even as you're being lead parent.
That's great advice. Question here.
Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a generic guy.
Welcome.
You're clearly very successful. And you talk about success, and success is good. I think we all want to be successful. But I think a big part of work-life balance is failure. It's dealing with your inability to work as hard as you want at work, make a project go, being absent from your kid's soccer game, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell us about a time when you failed, seriously failed? Maybe a time when you and your husband came close to divorce because you couldn't balance your life and work, so that we have some perspective on what it's really like to really struggle. Thank you.
Okay, so I will thank you for the question. It's an important one. And I will say, so two things. So one, and I wrote about this, when my son was in first grade, my elder son, he was asked to draw his family, and he drew me as a laptop. Not a person typing in a laptop. There was no person in the picture. There was just a laptop.
Ow.
That was not a good moment, right? That he drew his father cooking, right? His father was there. I wasn't. I was just become dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, and clearly I was absent. So that was not a good moment. And yes, I could write an entire book on interspousal negotiation. Most of our conversation consisted of, you didn't give me credit for this, I did this, you did this. We tried every system under the sun to divide it, hours on the refrigerator, computer apps, you name it, because we were constantly pulling and tugging. There are those games we missed, and I don't think my elder son spun out because I went to Washington, but I don't think it helped. I think he was trying really hard to be mature. He was 12. He knew this was an important job for me, but he had also just started middle school, and I think he felt abandoned and knew he couldn't express that. So no question. And I'll just conclude that by saying at one point, my husband and I had been having a discussion that you might call a fight if you were so inclined. And my older son came in and said, this was a while back, and he said, Mom, are you and Dad going to divorce when we go to college? And I said, sweetheart, when you go to college, we won't have anything to fight about. And that's true. So absolutely. All of us, this is hard. That's part of my point. It is hard. And if you have anything else, again, a job away, a child with special needs, a divorce, anything else can tip that. So that then I talk about in the book, the tipping point where suddenly you just can't do it anymore. And you got to change jobs, or you have to, somehow adjust so that you can respond to the needs of the moment.
Thank you. Question here. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what advice you would give or what you would say to a single working mom who's going to be vacuuming this room tonight, or who's working in security for this building right now, or who's signing up at front.
So I would say that in my article, I had nothing to say to her, because I wrote that article from the position of privilege that I was in. I knew it. I was writing for The Atlantic, so I knew what my readership looked like. But I would say I also thought about gender issues almost entirely in terms of the fact there were too few women at the top, and that what we needed to do was to get more women at the top. 4 years later, after 3 years reading, writing, wrestling with issues, I think, yep, there are too few women at the top, and there are too many at the bottom. The poorest people in our society, the poorest people, are those single mothers. And 2/3 of minimum wage workers, shift workers, and part-time workers are women. So the reason I focus on care is because I think I buy my way out of care problems. That mother you're describing can't. And so things like paid family leave, she can lose her job when her child is sick. That's a society that says you have to choose between staying home with a child and your job is an immoral society. So I'm focused on those issues. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. Right here.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I graduated from college 2 years ago, and I was interested in what you said about the few years right after you graduate, those being really important years to just totally be all in on your career. And what I have found with my friends since we graduated and since we lost this incredible community that we had at school, people really clung to relationships. My friends really clung to boyfriends or guys they just met or partners they just met because they missed that feeling of community. My question for you is, as we think about how much we want to value our relationships this early on in our career, what's your advice? Do you think that it is crucial to have those years where you don't think about a relationship at all this early?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question, and it's an important one. I mean, after I wrote my article, a young Princeton graduate wrote to me and said she was going to leave her job to follow her boyfriend across the country, and that everybody was disapproving. And she said, ironically, had she been leaving her job to follow her girlfriend across the country, probably it would have been better. But her larger point was, wait just a minute. Why is it that Princeton teaches me I should follow my career everywhere and not invest in relationships? And I would say, again, that's been part of my journey. The theme of this entire book festival is journeys. And I would say, I now think that investing in those relationships, and I think that is the work of a lead parent. My mother, who was a homemaker, was investing in her family, is critically important, because that I do think you can work harder, you can travel, absolutely, but I do think those relationships are your foundation, right? When things go wrong, that's what catches you, whether it's your family or it's your best friends. And family is anything, people you love whom you choose to make your family. So I do think that's important. I think I would say it's a time when you can spend more time on your work than your relationships, but I would say you shouldn't ever do only one to the exclusion of the other, if you possibly can.
But to the specific point about how important it is in your 20s, a year out of college to ramp
go
up
for it.
fast and just go for it. I mean, you do write about how much easier it has made your choices and path that you got to a pretty successful point in your career relatively early on, so that you were the boss and you could set the agenda and the schedule.
I do, but I was divorced at 30 and married again at 35, and I got tenure in between, and I sometimes wonder, what if I hadn't been divorced? What if we were having children in our early 30s? And I've also written about my infertility problems, right? I waited until I was 35, and I had a child at 38, and that was a terrible period where I really thought, I have sacrificed my ability to have biological children to my career. And so part of what I'm saying now is that's right. I mean, if you come to me as a young woman, given the world we're in, I'm realistic enough to say, hey, try to make partner first, try to get to a place first. But I'll also say, try to do that by your early 30s, not your late 30s. But what I'm saying in this book is it doesn't have to be that way, right? We should be able to say you're gotten up to here on whatever path you're on, you now slow down, you don't drop out, you slow down, you have your children, you do whatever, and then when you're ready, your workplace ought to say, great, you're ready, let's see if you can do the job. But yes, given where we are, it is a good idea to get as high as you can as early as you can.
All right, I'm going to take one last one if you can keep it quick, right here.
Sure. You talked a little bit of this in the talk, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. What effect do you believe the continued prevalence and acceptance of children raised by same-sex couples will have on accelerating the decoupling and dismantling of gender biases related to how we align caregiving in our careers, both in terms of public policy and corporate practice?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I think same-sex couples are leading the way. And indeed, it was early on when I was giving a talk on my article when a young woman came up to me and said, I and my partner, who was another woman, she said, there is no default role here. There is no, I'm the woman, so I'm the caregiver, and she's the woman, so she's the breadwinner, and ditto for two men, there is no default. And so what I argue is we should all think about it that way. It depends on your personality, your ambitions, your level of income, your boss, where you are in life. All of those things should determine who's lead parent and who's lead breadwinner. And it doesn't always have to be, you know, lead one and lead the other. There are times you can really divide it equally. But those are the factors that matter, not whatever genitalia you were born with.
I don't think we can top that as an in place, so we will leave it there. Thank you. And Anne-Marie Slaughter, thank you. Pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.